Hello, everyone. Our today's guest is Beiji Campbell. You can check his socials on the episode description. Beiji, thank you so much for joining me. I was looking forward to explore um, deconstructing media narratives and public perception, also the concept of egregores and collective consciousness, and finally, societal structures.
Okay.
My first question to you is, in your article Anatomy of Anti-Gun Lie, Mass Shooting in America, you
Uh-huh.
dissect how media narratives can distort public perception. Could you elaborate on the methodologies you employ to identify and challenge these distortions and discuss the broader implications of such media practice on public opinion and policy making?
It's a broad question. It's going to take a long time to jump through. So if I miss it, bring it back and re-ask elements of it. One thing that I see being plugged into the American gun community is the American gun community has a perception that this is a vast conspiracy against us, right?
Mm.
And I don't think that's always true. I think that a lot of media in a lot of areas, and the reason I started writing at all was because I was unpacking gun narratives that were objectively false mathematically, and they drove me nuts. And I had a lot of very smart friends that were saying things that they thought made them look smart when they were actually wrong. They're based on bad data and twisted up statistics and whatnot.
Yeah.
When I started to unpack it, I noticed that I wrote, I don't know, some 5 or 6 articles about unpacking these narratives, and the articles that got the most traffic that I wrote were the ones that were the most shareable. And some of the most important ones that I wrote, like things about, suicide rates and stuff like that, that are the most valuable to society, didn't get any traffic at all.
Yeah.
So that got me thinking about the incentives behind the emergent media ecosystem in 2017 and 2018. Nowadays, we have, this understanding of the attention economy. We didn't really have that back then. Nobody really understood what was going on. Everybody's just chasing the clicks. And I ended up rounding out my series of gun articles, which I started doing on a Medium, within kind of a expose of this machine. And somebody replied in the comment section. They said, "Are you Scott Alexander?" I'm like, "Who's that?" I had no experience really with online rationalist movements or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, I'll go." And he says, "Yeah, somebody already wrote this article in 2014." It was I'd kind of rewritten Alex's Scott Alexander's article, and which one it was, I can't remember the name of it. It just flew out of my head. But it was the one about, how the stuff that he wrote that got the most traffic was going to be the most valuable in a culture war argument, not necessarily the most valuable to society. So if he does a review on a, psychoactive drug that's important for people to know about, and gets nothing. But if he writes something about, the wokes or whatever, it's going to get a lot, because that's what was hitting back then, right?
Yeah.
So once I started to understand that mechanic, I started to see it in other domains. And I think that it is that kind of behavior from the media is largely a result of the media ecosystem itself, the game theory that exists under the hood. They have to get clicks to keep their lights on. So they're encouraged to write things in such a way that it's going to incite and enrage the public. And then that gets shared the most. And then because we have, through social media, created our own little information silos, echo chambers, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
that's what you feed to be able to get an article to bounce around, to get enough sharing, to get enough clicks, to get enough ad revenue, to make sure that you make, salary that week. And because it's a tragedy of the commons situation where there's only so much attention space in the attention economy, it boils down to the very sort of fundamental shared resource mechanics of the original description of the tragedy of the commons. Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah, more or less. Not.
Yeah. When we could go through that in case any of your listeners aren't familiar with it, the idea was you got an old English town and a bunch of people have sheep and they are all around a big grassed quad. And if there's enough grass for one sheep per person, everybody's cool. But if one person goes and gets 5 sheep, then the other people are incentivized to also get 5 sheep, and then you got no grass left. So it's a Nash equilibrium in game theory, but they didn't have game theory back then, so they called it the tragedy of the commons, right? And this same Nash equilibrium erupts from the media business model ever since the invention of Facebook and personalized feeds and like and share button. So when you read Haidt or some of the other big intellectuals, they identify the moment when our shared understanding of the world started to pull apart was when the like and the share mechanics were added to social media. And that, I don't know whether or not, because I try not to read Haidt because I have such an overlap with his stuff. I don't want to get my thoughts polluted by his thoughts in case I happen to have something original. Right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like if you're writing music, you don't want to listen to too much music because you might accidentally copy some music, right?
Yeah.
So the gist there is that the reason everything started to go wonky at that moment was because that moment changed the media over to click chasing and clickbait. And we didn't know what clickbait was 2018, 2019. Now we are starting to finally get an understanding about it. We're starting to treat media now as we used to treat TV advertisements in the 1980s and 1990s. And all media, right? All news is some kind of advertisement now. But we didn't realize that then. And some people still don't, right?
Yeah.
So then you end up with a scenario where an idea can bounce around inside an echo chamber, and then whatever becomes most viral becomes true to the people inside that echo chamber. And then they've crafted, because everybody spends more time on their phones than looking out their windows, they've created a sense of reality based on this clickbait. And it's not just one group. It could be any number of groups, right? I mean, I think the red tribe and the blue tribe in the United States are two very distinct ones that have two very different understandings of reality. And that's been covered by like New York Times and everything else. They say, hey, look at what a red feed looks like on Facebook. And they're all shocked because they're all staring at their blue feeds on Facebook. But if you inverse it,
right,
the reds would be shocked at what the blues are looking at. But that's not just red and blue. Those are just big ones. I mean, if you've got a flat earth feed, I'm sure, right? And if you Google too much about flat earth, and the algorithms are going to feed you more flat earth articles, and suddenly you're down that rabbit hole. And it's a tiny little echo chamber being fed by some small number of media outlets that make money by feeding it. It's the same thing. And then once you've got that going, you have a recipe for definitional insanity, right? So if you imagine I had a time machine and you and I jumped in the time machine and we went back to Aztec, Mexico, right?
Yeah.
We've got the pyramids and we're going to climb the top. We climb the pyramid and we look around, and what do we see? We see them like sacrificing a baby to make sure the sun comes up. Now that seems objectively insane to you and me. We know that's not true. But if we stop them, they're going to look at us like we're the insane ones, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to prevent the sun from coming up. And it's because the Aztecs and you and I have different understandings of the basics of reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we were to capture an Aztec, bring it back through the time machine and turn him loose in downtown LA at night, he's going to think he's surrounded by insane people and he's going to be trying to find a baby to sacrifice to make sure the sun comes up.
Yeah.
And we're going to call him insane. So that thought experiment outlines the fact that insanity is definitionally culturally relative.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah.
Okay. So everybody parked in a red echo chamber thinks the blue chamber people are insane. I know a lot of reds. They all look at the blues. Are like, those people are insane. They've lost their minds. But I'm sure folks in the blue chamber are looking over the reds going, those people are insane. What are they doing? Why are they doing what they're doing? So we have a nested layer of cultural micro-insanities that have been created by the social media systems and the media's necessary reaction to those, because the media can't get out of it. They're in a game theory trap. They can't stop chasing clickbait because then they'll lose market share, and then somebody else who is chasing the clickbait will pick it up.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the solution is, but it's at least something to be aware of. And very few people I interact with in real life have any idea that this is going on.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. In many of your essays, you hint at a civilizational identity crisis on where traditional answers like nation, religion, or science are no longer coherent. Yeah, what happens to a society that loses all shared myth but still craves transcendent meaning?
Ooh, I think we're going to find out, aren't we? I mean, are there many historical examples of that? I don't really think so. There's biblical examples, like the Tower of Babel is almost literally what we're talking about,
Yeah.
like that myth, right? Because everybody suddenly couldn't talk to each other. What we have right now is people are not being able to talk to each other about certain concepts, like in the United States, racism, for instance. There's like 4 or 5 completely different definitions of racism that are throwing around.
And yeah, how do you think we should approach that kind of conflict within trying to define something that should be quite globalized definition, but everyone has their view?
The only thing I can figure to do is to write all the different definitions down. And if I have a conversation with somebody about racism, I ask them specifically before the conversation begins, are we talking about individual racial prejudice? Are we talking about underlying social bias? Are we talking about systems of governance and economics that produce differential racial outcomes, even though they don't necessarily intentionally differentiate by race? What are we talking about here? And we'll lay all the definitions out and say, which one are you speaking about? And don't let them jump between definitions mid-sentence. It's the only way to have a conversation like that. But most people can't do that, right? And to kind of dial back to the underlying question of your last question, you're like, what do we do about this? I approach this from a prepper mindset, and the American prepper mindset is not how do we fix the thing that's going to break, it's how do we survive it after it breaks. So, like my answer to a lot of what should we do about this problem ends up being, buy more ammo and get some chickens. Like that's it. But I feel like I try not to put my foot into the pool of when I write, we should do X, meaning we as society, because I don't feel I have any control over that. One, two, in order for me to get enough traction to be able to get enough people to listen to me,
Right. Yeah.
I would have to do the clickbait chasing thing. And then I would be preaching to one of the existing echo chambers, which are emergent phenomena that I didn't cause. So it's to me, it's like a lost cause. It's like you're just watching trains about to wreck, and you're got to keep an eye about when to jump off the boxcar, that sort of thing, and then try and figure out what's going to come next. That's the more fun thing to me, is to, if you're seeing a disaster, we've been through many disasters as a race, as a species. And we always come out looking different on the other side. I'm curious what we're going to look like after the sense-making crisis completely unravels what we have going on here.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, and do you think we're like living the best time, like in our entire time in this planet, the human species? Do you think now is the best time to be alive?
Well, from most of the measurables, the answer is yes. We've fixed some things so badly, or so well, that our fix causes problems. We had this, war against hunger here in the 1970s, and now we're all obese.
Yeah.
So, like, or you look at any other real objective time. I mean, the idea that you can buy a 60-inch flat screen TV for the same cost as like 5 good dinners is absurd. But you got to remember, if everybody's plugged into social media, what plays in social media is complaining. And so everybody's got to find something to complain about. And when they do that, the world looks awful when it's not. For most, for like you and I and anybody who's going to be listening to this podcast, the world probably looks pretty good. It's it's a little bit rough to live in the rural Philippines, that kind of thing. I mean, but it's still probably better there than it used to be. But so we're in a scenario where life is probably objectively as best as it's ever been. But it seems awful because our feeds are telling us that it's awful because they get money from it. And one thing I like to do to try and keep perspective, I remember I had a conversation with my father a while ago, and he was, I was complaining about, I don't know, civil liberties being undermined by the Patriot Act in the United States, I think. It was something like that.
Yeah.
And which was it's a real thing. They were undermined, and I was very concerned, and I was starting to rant and rave, and he told me, he said, BJ, yeah, when I was your age, they had the draft.
Ooh.
And I had to think back. I'm like, yeah, my dad joined the Air Force to avoid getting drafted in the Army. So that's a civil liberties infringement, the likes of which nobody alive right now in the United States at a younger age has ever seen. Right.
Ooh.
And so that gives me a good kind of like grounding for perspective, at least, and so I think that's the kind of thing that most people they don't really have perspective anymore. I think one of the things that really drove that home for me was, my wife got cancer in 2017, and she passed away in 2019.
Oh,
and
sorry.
I've been a single parent, the whole time.
Ooh.
But that happened right before COVID. So I was in like putting the world on my shoulders, stoic man, get over it, time to move on. Life sucks, but we live past it or we don't. And sometimes death happens mindset right when COVID hit.
Ooh.
And then everybody around me was freaking the fuck out about germs. And I didn't understand. I was like, yeah, okay, somebody's probably going to die from this disease. It doesn't mean we should, destroy the entire economy and make it so that nobody in the millennial generation can ever afford to buy a house because of inflation.
Mm.
And they were all but like, germs. I'm like, holy shit, wow, look how crazy everybody is.
Yeah.
Echo chambers, etc. Right? So, I I'd like to say that I have better perspective than somebody else, but I think everybody thinks they have good perspective because that's the tragedy about perspective. There's no way you can possibly have an exterior perspective on your own perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, but I do think that meditation quite helps a lot, and some introspection and self-inquiry.
Yeah, I think probably. I used to meditate in high school and a little bit in college, but I haven't done that recently. It'd be nice to get back into it. I know a lot of very intelligent people who do that, and I've never heard of anybody having a bad experience from doing it. Right?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah,
it is at the very minimum, it does not hurt, and everybody who does it regularly, who practices it, in a robust way, pretty well
mm,
gets addicted to it. And well, not addicted. It becomes a habit for them that's positive.
yeah.
And maybe I should do that at some point, but.
Yeah, and yeah, such recently in the last couple of decades, such immense progress has been made by the human species, while like 100 or like thousands of years ago, barely any significant progress was made. Do you think our minds or our no, yeah, our minds or our relationship with ourselves is also evolving in the same way as as technology or other fields?
100%. I mean, you can see in the numbers. We reached kind of peak IQ, I think, 1 or 2 decades ago. Now
Really?
it's starting to go back down. Yeah, yeah,
Oh, I didn't saw that.
yeah. And I believe kind of fall into the height mindset here. I believe part of it is because we're outsourcing more and more of our mental capacity to our smartphones. Like,
Ah,
I don't know the names of the streets around my house. I moved up here in 2020. I know like 4 street names because my phone navigates for me.
yeah.
Right? And so that's a whole piece of my brain that used to be dedicated to a lot of stuff that's all dried up. I don't know but like 3 phone numbers anymore. And so that's one example. But then if people are trying to lean on their phones for their moral compass, and they've outsourced their moral compass to Tumblr,
Yeah.
then you end up with a rich environment where things like the sort of the woke egregores can pop out and populate people's behavior. And we, as a species, for a very long time, had a corner of our brains carved out for religion or group tribal behavior. And even if the behavior was irrational, it was something we did as a group. And that's been the space that religion and nationalism has occupied. And I believe that to be an evolution, an adapted quality, because if you got 100 monkeys on the east side and 100 monkeys on the west side, and the ones on the west side all have that capacity for religion, it's likely they're going to eventually band up, or nationalism. They're going to band up and beat the shit out of the ones on the east side, kill them, and take their bananas. So then that genetic trait that has brain architecture that allows for mob beliefs to arise and mob behavior to propagate is evolutionary beneficial.
Yeah.
So we're
And
stuck with it. We've all got that, and evolution happens at a much slower time scale than technological advancement. So we're walking into a scenario where we're more and more connected. We're sharing our brains more through our smartphones, which are essentially brain extensions, and
yeah.
are going to become more closely associated with brain extensions as they're able to plug them more into our actual brainwaves.
Hmm. Yeah.
And we've got this leftover evolutionary chunk of brain matter that likes to band up into groups and do awful shit sometimes, like put Jews on trains. So that's gonna play out. Like something with this century is going that we're gonna see it again. It's never gone away. It was just kind of suppressed for a little while after the sort of like general shock of how awful World War II was. But it'll come back as soon as we forget that, and then it's going to come back fueled by smart media technology, and who knows how that manifests. I don't really know.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned religion in the middle. Yeah, in the last maybe 80 years, a lot of scientific progress has been made. And yeah, I think lately I've been studying a lot religion, and science and religion are both kind of try to explain our existence. Do you think with this such big scientific progress lately, people are kind of discarding religion?
I think it's obviously true. The more interesting question is why. And the to a just sort of regular Walmart shopper, the answer is, science gives me a PlayStation 2 and religion gives me sores on my ass while I have to sit in church, right?
Yeah.
And also is not as explanatory and of the environment, of the physical world.
Yeah.
And I believe that that's a legacy from the fact that most of the religions were written a long time ago and they have very slow update mechanics. So
yeah.
You've got you can make changes to overall Christianity with a Council of Nicaea or with a new Protestant branch forming. The problem is that those councils are hard to draw, and it's really difficult to overwrite prior dogma because then you have to admit to being wrong. And new branches of Protestant faith are going to necessarily look like cults when they start. And might be, and it is especially difficult to start a new religion from scratch without it turning into an awful and unproductive sex cult. That's just that's the mode.
And
so
yeah, do you think people or society in general needs religion?
I think we need to fill that white space in our head with something.
Yeah.
The nice thing about traditional religions is that they kind of won out in a religious Darwinism game against all the other ones. I mean, you look 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, there's probably 1,000, 2,000, God knows how many religions across the world.
Yeah.
And the ones that had the best indoctrination spreads to be able to manage large societies are the ones that beat out the other ones. This is why your golden rule shows up in all the different religions. Or it could be because God gave that rule to 5 different religions or whatever. But that's the sort of treat your others as you wish to be treated ends around a lot of really awful societal mechanics that that you would otherwise need omniscient cops to manage, right? So there might be a mode in the future where one or more societies pivots away from religion and just uses omniscient cops, right? Use AI and, cameras and, Boston Dynamics robot dogs with machine guns strapped to their backs. You could do that to keep the peace. It's, I think, suboptimal to everybody just going to church on every Sunday and learning to be nice to each other. But that's, if the teaching is be nice because of hell or be nice because of this other thing that doesn't marry up with our scientific expectations, then it doesn't work well. I think there's some space in the coming century for either religions to come up with faster update mechanics or for a new religion to step in the gap and be something that people can occupy that brain space with, that
Yeah.
conveys all of the appropriate societal controls that religion had, or
Do you
has.
think we always need to have that brain space occupied by a formal religion, at least?
I think it makes it a lot easier. I think there's certainly some people, like you could say, let's make fun of Sam Harris for a second, right? So Sam is, he was part of the new atheist movement.
Yeah.
Religion is a mind virus, this, that, and the other. And then you ask Sam where he gets his moral and ethical compass from. And if I recall correctly, it was because he did like DMT on a canoe in Nepal, right? And then he had that some kind of moment where he was like, oh, I understand now. That's not a scalable solution to the Walmart shoppers, right?
Yeah,
Like,
makes sense.
You can't put everybody on a canoe in Nepal and give them DMT, and if you did, it'd be a real fucked up lake that everybody was on, right? I mean, like you can't guarantee that path is even going to have good results, right? So, whatever. Society needs a scalable solution to that issue, a way to convey behavior. And while the intellectual elite might be able to sit around and debate Hume and the secular humanism, that's not something that easily plays for the Walmart shoppers, and you need a solution at the very minimum for them. And that's why religion, one of the reasons why religion works so well. It's like, this is rote dogma. Learn the rote dogma because you probably wouldn't be able to understand where it came from. But it came from somewhere important. We all need to do it. And that rote dogma could be, 10 Commandments. It could be the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag in the morning before classes start in school. It could be any number of things. But all of those sorts of allegiances to isms appear in cultures for a reason. It's because they need to fill that white space with some kind of a behavioral alignment program, and the behavioral alignment program has to be indoctrinated somehow or another, right?
Yeah. And I think religion also creates a lot of trust. Like, before we had formal religions, you probably saw a guy in the street and, I don't know, you kind of suspect him or try to kill him because you didn't know. But nowadays with religion, and I think religion is mainly, we don't need religion, we need the social structure that religion brings. And and it's the default mode of organization for man. And this is obvious when one looks at any human organization, like a government or a club. I think religion provides one such structure that is compatible with the human predilection for social hierarchy.
When I have made that case to other religious folks who are smart religious folks before, like Paul Vanderklay and I got into this a little bit when I was in his podcast. He brought up something that's very poignant, I thought, and other religious folks I've talked to brought up the same thing, is that, like, if you do let's say Christian, you do the Christian program, but you don't have the belief, it doesn't work as well. And if you do have the belief, it works way better. So the belief itself is efficacious from a game theory standpoint. And if you have two different cultures, each of which are running a belief system or an indoctrination system, and one of them has founded on belief and the other one isn't, the one that's founded on belief is going to win out in the long term. So the belief itself is useful from a social Darwinism standpoint, which means that the religion is part of the religion, the part that the rationalists don't like. That's there's a justification for it, even inside, just a Darwinist lens.
Yeah, you were saying a very interesting thing about belief. I actually know a very funny quote. I'm not sure if this is well said, but it's from Garrison Keillor. So yeah, I'm trying to quote: "Anyone who thinks sitting in church can make you a Christian must also think that sitting in a garage can make you a car." And it's very much like this. And yeah, I think I found out that a lot of my close friends and even family that are religious, they never really question uh, religion. And I think the main question is not why are you Christian or Jewish or wherever, it's why are you religious?
Well, let's bang on Garrison Keillor for a second. I've got a Prairie Home Companion flyer signed by Garrison Keillor, framed upstairs. And you got to remember his perspective. He is Minnesota public radio, and Minnesota's full of Lutherans. And the Lutherans are kind of the notoriously stuffiest Protestant group that, exists, right?
Yeah.
And everybody there's a large number of people in Minnesota are Lutheran because the Lutherans moved there when they fled Europe, right? So his perspective on that is built by his view of, what's common where he's at. And whether or not, so sitting in a new Lutheran church is not going to make you a Christian if you're defining Christian by belief necessarily, right? If you're defining it by behavior, sure it can. I mean, any kind of, if it's just, do you act according to the dogma? I mean, anybody, you can sit in church, pick up the dogma, and then act about it, later on,
Right.
fine.
Yeah.
But if you're defining it from a belief standpoint, then the belief is most commonly promulgated by charisma, by charismatic leaders, or by a sort of a deeply committed social group. Well, I was raised a Quaker in North Carolina, and Quakers don't have preachers at all. It's a silent worship kind of thing. And so all of your belief in that comes from kind of like meditative participation in the community.
Yeah.
It's a different deal. So there's not just one belief path, but I would say ordinarily, at least in the United States, belief comes from a very charismatic preacher and a whole lot of people around you who are way into it, It's kind of like when it works here, it's kind of like a sports event. Everybody sitting in the stadium to watch Barca believes in that Barca's going to score. Right, like that's the fun part. Like that's what's fun.
Yeah,
and that kind of energy is, I believe, our brains are wired to channel that kind of energy as part of that beliefs box. Part of the religion box is capitalized by sports. So anybody who can leverage that can push a belief system, and then whoever pushes a belief system that has efficacious societal rules to it is gonna come out on top, right? Traditionally speaking, what happens now that everybody's perceptions are disconnected, and we have all these echo chambers, and there's no uniting force to any of it. I couldn't imagine there being one. I don't know. I don't know where we go in the next century. The other thing that's going to be weird about the next century is populations are going to start to go down. And as soon as that happens, the overall framework of capitalism is going to be incredibly constrained. And we're going to be in a situation where we have, abundant resources, but no incentive to save, which means you don't have the future worth of present money that drives capital projects. So I don't, and then you end up with ghost towns, right? So I don't know what's going to happen globally. The only countries that have a positive birth rate, as far as I'm aware, are Muslim ones, and not even the rich Muslim ones.
Hmm.
It's just the poor Muslim ones. Everybody else is
Yeah.
losing population now. So, I mean, like, the United States' population is only stable because of immigration. But we can't count on immigration to keep ours stable because the population has started to decline in South America.
Right. Yeah.
And Europe, similar kind of deal. As best as I understand it from the news I read, you've got a lot of African immigration. And
And
some of the in Middle East and some of those populations are still growing. So, you might be able to keep capitalism working longer there, but it'll be a very different looking capitalism than you're used to from a, racial stratification standpoint.
and yeah, what do you think will going to be the main concerns when our population starts to go drastically down?
That's something I've been trying to wrap my head around for a while. I haven't written anything on it because it's such a big question, and I feel like if I stick my toe in that pool, there's too much to understand yet. I haven't had time to really sit down and drill into it. It's going to be great for the environment.
Oh, yeah.
Like the oceanic plastics problem is going to go down. We're going to have less emissions. We're going to have overall less toxic sludge. The oceanic dead zones will probably start to shrink. So those are all good things, right?
Oh.
But once you no longer have population growth, what happens when the whole country turns into a ghost town? Like we have ghost towns all through the United States because, the mine dried up or whatever,
Yeah.
And those are interesting to walk into. I've been to Bodie in California. I think it was a silver mine. It was one of the last American ghost towns. And it's cool. It's preserved. It's weird. It's to walk around and imagine people used to live there. But, there's portions of Detroit that are dried up. They're trying to one of the biggest strains they have on their municipalities now is what to do with empty city blocks.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. I think you're going to see that kind of stuff happening more and more. And then the remaining people are going to concentrate in a few or larger number of metro areas. And I don't know what it's like in Europe right now, but in the United States, we are very seriously dividing culturally along the rural-urban divide. And like our red and blue tribes are red is incredibly rural coded, male coded. Blue is incredibly urban, incredibly female coded. And like the very basic, it's not even about issues anymore. It's about whether or not you listen to country music. And those tribes are pulling further apart because of the echo chamber problem. And I can't imagine them not continuing to do so, right? Like, I could see a scenario 100 years from now where most of the United States is just empty. And there's a few very large metropolitan population centers which are highly transhuman, right? Not just transgender, but cyborgs and, brains plugged into permanent smartphones embedded in their whatever, and, very prone to egregore capture, as you would expect. And then your rural communities are probably going to be Luddites, I mean, like the Amish and stuff like that, maybe the Mormons. And that could be what the thing looks like. And flyover country, that, slur that the Hillary Clinton and the Blues were using in 2016, that could just become a really serious, really legit thing where people just either live in their own metro center or just fly to the other 4 big metro centers, and the rest of the country is just not there or ignored. I think if it was more geographical, would be likely we just divide into smaller countries. But the problem is if your country is a city, or it's like a bunch of little cities spread all around, like that, you can't really have borders.
Yeah, that's
so that that kind of thing. I
Okay.
mean, like a lot of people view California as this big blue wall of a state, but 80% of the land in California are red farmers. It's just the coast that's blue.
Mm. Yeah.
So, like, how does, if there's a great civil war here, what the first thing that happened in California is everybody from Sacramento east would, like, join Nevada. so, so it's, I don't know what it looks like here. Like, when the economy collapses, that's what's going to be when,
Oh, yeah.
things get hairy, right? Like, as long as everybody can still earn a living, nobody's going to shoot anybody else here. We've got Twitter to operate as a steam release valve. It's way easier to get online and yell slurs than it is to actually pick up a rifle and shoot your neighbors. So people just use online as their steam release valve. Right? That's what happened in 2020 here. It's like we had the biggest civil unrest in probably at least since the 1960s happen here, and nobody died. Very, very few people died during it. I was surprised. I think the Reds and the Blues here both need to get a pat on the back for not killing each other during all that. And the reason why was because they could just go onto Facebook and yell till they were blue in the face and then have a beer and go to sleep. Right. So that's what they did. So we have probably avoided a civil war in 2020 because of the social media thing that I'm shitting on. Right. So that's good, I guess.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm curious to know what's the most important thing you've learned in your life?
Most important thing I've learned in my life? Wow. How to be a good husband, I think.
Really?
And that was not easy to learn. That's something you don't just pick up a book. That's a series of experiences.
Wow, that's a funny one, actually. Yeah.
Why do you say that?
I don't know. I was expecting something more like personal or being a
It's
good.
very personal.
Yeah, of course, but something more kind of related with your own identity, or like not something very exterior.
So, I mean, imagine what you do during your life, right?
Yeah.
The majority of what I've done during my life is be a civil engineer and a husband and a father, right? And if you divide it up, it's like engineering, husbanding, fathering, and sleeping is most of what I do. So if you're going to say the most important thing you learn, it's got to be related to one of those four.
Yeah.
I feel like being a good husband spills into all the rest of it too, right? I mean, I could have had a fulfilling life as a single person, but I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I was married. I'm currently engaged to be married again, so
Really,
I'm excited
for
about
you.
that. Yeah. I think single people they're missing out. If they can find somebody who's a good match, they should marry them and try out that lifestyle. It's much nicer, in my opinion.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And yeah, what's a book, a quote, or idea that shaped your thinking?
I think the one that's most relevant to the publication is The True Believer by Eric Hoffer. That book is really, it's weird because that book has no references. It doesn't, so it's making a bunch of assertions out in space, but they feel right when you read them, right?
Yeah.
And when the 2020 thing was hitting here, I pulled it back off the shelf of an old, like, dog-eared paperback from the 1970s. It'll break if I open it too hard. And I read through it at the beach, and I was like, holy shit, this is all happening right here, right now. And then I started doing more research on it, and the Hillary Clinton people were claiming that it was all happening, and that's why she lost. They were pointing to the MAGA thing as having evidence in it, and I was like, well, okay, didn't see that, but I could see it now. And then I it looked like the wokes were also doing the same thing. And so then I started thinking about like what Eric Hoffer would do if he were alive today. Like he would not be participating in our modern American culture wars at all. He would be trying to chronicle them.
Yeah.
And as a historian live watching it. That I believe that's probably what he would have, probably done. I mean, it's kind of what he did in the aftermath of World War II. So I feel like that's a good compass for my writing. I try not to participate in these culture wars. I don't want to pick up a side. A lot of the stuff that I write is more useful to the anti-woke contingent than the woke contingent, but a lot of times I write it from a perspective of trying to explain to the wokes what they're doing and why.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I mean, I could write a lot of the similar stuff about the MAGAs, but it's just kind of boring. I don't think that their thing is fully formed or as interesting to analyze as the woke thing right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
I think that MAGA is sort of a fundamentally less intelligent approach to it because of who's involved with it, right? If you look at, I mentioned the reds and blues are splitting up male, female, and rural, urban. The other one they're splitting up on is IQ mental problems. So if this is funny, you can see this in the numbers too. The reds have a measurable lower average IQ than the blues, and the blues have a tremendously higher measurable incidence of mental health problems.
Whoa.
And so, like, if you really wanted to get dirty with it and throw around mean words, it's like the loonies versus the retards. But and I don't mean to disparage either of them, right? Because I have friends in both, but that's kind of how it's breaking, and I think that those trends I haven't seen any walk back in those trends. They seem to be continuing to escalate. So the IQ thing makes sense because the Reds, the Trump Reds, have pivoted over to being the party of labor in the United States, and the blues were traditionally the party of labor, but they just presumed they would always stay the party of labor because they read Marx in college and not because they were paying any attention to the stresses that were literally happening to American labor, right? And eventually American labor bailed. They bailed on them in 2016. Trump won the Rust Belt. 2020 was kind of an aberration. And I think without COVID and BLM and a lot of the instability there, Trump would have won in 2020. And to be fact, I think Trump would have won in 2020 if he was allowed to announce the vaccine before the election. I think he'd have won here then. And we wouldn't have Trump anymore. He'd aged out, right? But if you look at the Rust Belt went heavily bent towards Trump in 2024. And it just kind of comes from the blues presumed that they would always have labor in their pocket while they continued to promote policies who were anti-labor. Because they didn't really see pro-labor as being like increased minimum wage. But the folks in labor realize that increased minimum wage may mean that you can't afford to pay some people to work, and so they lose their jobs. And blues see OSHA, occupational safety and health, as pro-labor. But the people in labor don't, because they're the ones that have to deal with the rules getting more and more complicated every year and costing more and more to comply. And the blues see environmental protection as kind of like pro-labor because it makes it so you can breathe the air in Gary, Indiana. But the labor sees it as as a justification for the company to move the factory overseas to Vietnam. Right?
Yeah.
So all of the blue policy in the mind of the blue intellectuals is pro-labor in their heads, but on the ground it was anti-labor, and labor revolted. And so now labor they moved over to the Reds almost entirely. And I don't know that the blues have enough people to build a coalition to be able to take control, at least in the short term. Like, I think that, and none of them, they're still kind of shell-shocked over here. They still don't know why they lost. They can't have honest conversations about how to put together a winning coalition anymore. The weird Trump, the weird tariff stuff that Trump was doing on the ground, it's pro-labor. And the blues are freaking out about it because it's killing their 401ks, and they don't realize that the people that voted for Trump don't have a 401k because they lost their job because their job's being done in Vietnam now.
Yeah.
So how are they going to, what are they going to do, right? Like, how are they going to be able to bring people over to their coalition without providing them something that their policy took away, and they're they don't have the ability to understand that they did it. So from a political standpoint, that's where the U.S. stands right now, and that's one of the reasons why, like, during all the last week's tariff insanity, which I think is pretty insane the way they went about it. I don't think it's very smart at all. The support for the blues didn't change. It's still at a multi-decade low. So I don't know. That's if he can be that crazy, as crazy as he's been so far the whole time, and they're still that low in their approval, I don't know what they're going to do. They can't wait for Trump to screw up anymore, because he apparently can screw up all he wants. they've got to come up with something else, and I'll be curious to see, like, in order for them to be able to do it, they're going to have some leadership that rises, that's willing to admit what the problems are inside their mindset and everything. And I don't know that they have that. They don't have a good pipeline for that anyway.
Yeah, I guess we'll see in the future.
We'll see. I mean, like I said, I view the whole thing from a prepper mindset, and my analysis is not ever, we should do this, we being society. My analysis is, hey guys, let's pop popcorn and load magazines when necessary.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
it allows me to be pretty objective about the whole thing, I think. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you so much for joining me. It was a pleasure. I appreciate a lot your time and energy, and see you soon, man. Thank you so much.
All right,
again.
thanks. This is fun. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.